I stood alone by the two tiny graves, the rain mixing with my tears. 7 months. That's all the time I had with them. My beautiful boys, James and Julian, taken by a rare infection that swept through them like wildfire. The doctors said there was nothing they could have done, but that didn't stop the guilt that crushed my chest every time I took a breath. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. Nothing mattered now except saying goodbye to my sons. The identical white coffins looked impossibly small against the fresh dirt. How could something so small contain all that they were, all that they would have been? The minister spoke words of comfort that felt hollow, empty platitudes about God's plan and angels. I didn't want angels. I wanted my boys back in my arms, with their matching dimples and different cries that I could distinguish even in the darkest night. My mother squeezed my hand, her face a mirror of my grief. "Where's David?" she whispered. "He should be here. David, my husband, the father of these precious babies." The question sparked a flicker of anger through my numbness. Where was he? He'd been by my side through the hospital, through the devastating news, through the funeral arrangements. But this morning, he'd kissed my forehead and mumbled something about an emergency at work. An emergency more important than burying our children? The service ended. People approached with awkward hugs and murmured condolences. I nodded mechanically, not truly hearing them. My phone buzzed again. Finally, I pulled it out, hoping to see David's name, an explanation, an apology. Instead, there was a message. "Desculpe, reunião de negócios importante." Sorry, important business meeting. No, I love you. No, I'm thinking of you. No, I wish I could be there. Just a cold excuse in Portuguese, the language he'd been learning for a potential expansion of his consulting firm into Brazil. I stared at the screen until my mother gently took the phone from my trembling hands. "Let's go home, sweetheart. You need to rest." Home. The nursery with 2 cribs. The living room floor scattered with colorful toys. The refrigerator door plastered with ultrasound images. It wasn't home anymore. It was a museum of what should have been. Days passed in a blur. David didn't call, didn't come home. His business trips sometimes ran long, but never without communication. Never during something this important. My grief began to crystallize into something harder, sharper. On the 3rd day, I forced myself to shower, to eat something more substantial than crackers. I sat at our kitchen table and called his office. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Mitchell," his assistant said, genuine confusion in her voice. "Mr. Mitchell didn't mention any business meetings this week. In fact, he cleared his calendar because of your situation." She hesitated. "I thought he was with you." The phone slipped from my fingers, clattering onto the table. The pieces started falling into place. His secretive late-night calls, the new cologne, the language lessons that ran late. I'd been too absorbed in my pregnancy, then too devastated by our loss to see what was happening right in front of me. With shaking hands, I opened his laptop. We knew each other's passwords, or at least I thought we did. But when I typed in his usual combination, the screen flashed red. Denied. He'd changed it. I tried again with variations. Our anniversary, the twins' due date, his mother's birthday. Nothing worked. I was about to give up when I remembered the password he used for less important accounts. The name of his childhood dog combined with the year we met. The screen unlocked, revealing his email. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the mouse. Was I really going to invade his privacy? But then I remembered standing alone at our son's funeral, and my resolve hardened. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Flight confirmations. Hotel reservations. Not for Brazil, but for Thailand. Phuket, to be specific. Pristine beaches and luxury resorts. And not just one reservation. 2 tickets, 2 names. David Mitchell and Carolina Hamilton. I Googled her name. A LinkedIn profile appeared, Carolina Hamilton, International Marketing Director at a competing firm. Her profile picture showed a stunning woman with caramel skin and a confident smile. According to her profile, she was Brazilian, living in London for the past 3 years. Her endorsements included one from my husband, dated 9 months ago. While I was pregnant with our sons, while I was burying them, my husband was with her on a beach in Thailand. Something snapped inside me. The grief that had been suffocating me transformed into a cold, clear rage. I forwarded the emails to myself, took screenshots of their exchanges, some professional, others decidedly not, and began to plan. By the time I was done, our joint accounts were emptied, his credit cards maxed out on donations to children's charities, and every piece of evidence of his betrayal was neatly compiled in a folder labeled Thailand. Then I did something that would change everything. Something he never expected from his grieving, dependent wife. Something that, when he returned from his paradise getaway with his mistress, would leave him as shattered as I had been standing alone by those tiny graves. I looked at my handiwork and felt something stir within me that I thought had died with my sons. A will to survive, a determination to rebuild, and most surprisingly, a flutter of something that felt almost like freedom. The doorbell rang, right on time. I took a deep breath and went to answer it, knowing that what I was about to do would make it impossible to ever go back to the life I had before. But then again, that life was already gone, buried in 2 small coffins under the unforgiving rain. The man at the door wore an expensive suit and carried a leather briefcase. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Thomas Weber, from Weber and Associates Law Firm." He extended his hand. "Thank you for contacting us." I led him to the dining room table where I'd laid out all the documents, bank statements, property deeds, and the evidence of David's affair. As he reviewed each paper, his expression remained professionally neutral, but I caught a flicker of surprise when he reached the Thailand folder. "Your husband had no idea you were planning this?" he asked, glancing up at me. "David thinks I'm still the same woman he left behind," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "The one who would be too paralyzed by grief to function, let alone fight back." Mr. Weber nodded. "And you're certain about pursuing all of these measures? Some of them are quite aggressive." Was I certain? I thought of the years I'd spent supporting David's career, putting my own ambitions on hold. I thought of how I'd decorated the nursery while he was supposedly working late, nights he was actually spending with Carolina. I thought of how he couldn't even be bothered to show up for his own son's funeral. "Absolutely certain," I replied. After Mr. Weber left with copies of everything, I walked through the house that no longer felt like mine. In our bedroom, I opened David's closet. His expensive suits hung in perfect order. I ran my fingers over the fabric of his favorite jacket, the one he wore on our first date 7 years ago. We'd met at a charity fundraiser. I was there representing the marketing agency I worked for. He was a rising star in his consulting firm. He'd spilled champagne on my dress, then insisted on buying me dinner to apologize. His charm had been irresistible, the mixture of confidence and vulnerability, the way he talked about his dreams as if they were inevitable realities. I'd fallen hard and fast. Within a year, we were married. Within 2, I'd left my job to support his growing career, working freelance projects from home that never quite satisfied my ambition, but gave me the flexibility to be the perfect corporate wife. When we found out we were expecting twins, it seemed like the culmination of our perfect life. David had been thrilled, spinning me around the kitchen when the ultrasound revealed 2 heartbeats instead of 1. He'd been the one to paint the nursery, to assemble the cribs, to download apps that tracked the baby's development week by week. What had changed? When had he started looking elsewhere? Was it when the complications in my pregnancy put an end to our intimacy? Was it when my body changed? Or had it been happening all along, and I'd been too blinded by love and later by maternal focus to see it? I closed his closet door and moved to my dressing table. The face that looked back at me from the mirror was almost unrecognizable. Hollow-cheeked, dark circles under dull eyes, lips chapped from dehydration and neglect. This wasn't me. This broken shell wasn't who I was. Before meeting David, I'd been ambitious, confident, the youngest senior account manager in my agency's history. I'd had plans, dreams of my own. Somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten that woman, subsumed her into the role of Mrs. David Mitchell. I opened my jewelry box and took out the diamond earrings David had given me for our 5th anniversary. They sparkled under the bedroom light, catching prisms of color. Beautiful, valuable, and cold. just like the man who had given them to me. My phone chimed with a text message alert. David. My heart lurched despite everything, a Pavlovian response to the specific tone I'd assigned him. Coming home tomorrow. Flight lands at 8 p.m. Can you pick me up? No mention of where he'd been. No acknowledgement of what he'd missed. Just an expectation that I would be waiting, serving, accommodating as always. I didn't respond. Let him wonder. Let him face a fraction of the uncertainty I'd been living with. Instead, I called my mother. Can I stay with you for a few days? I asked when she answered. Of course, sweetheart. Is everything okay? I laughed, a hollow sound. No, Mom. Everything is not okay. But it will be. After packing a suitcase with only what I truly needed, I took one last look around the house that had been the setting for both my happiest and most devastating moments. In the corner of our living room stood a potted fiddle leaf fig tree that I'd nursed from a small sprout. It had nearly died twice, but with patience and care, it had grown tall and strong. Looking at it now, I felt a spark of recognition. That plant was like me, capable of surviving, of thriving even after being neglected. I added a bottle of water to the soil and whispered, "We'll both be okay." As I turned to leave, my gaze caught on the framed wedding photo by the door. David and me, laughing into each other's eyes, unaware of what lay ahead. I turned it face down. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn of the home we'd chosen together, dreaming of the family we would build. I placed my suitcase in the trunk of my car and slid into the driver's seat. The engine hummed to life, and with it, a sense of resolve crystallized within me. David would return tomorrow to an empty house and the consequences of his choices. He would discover just what I was capable of in his absence, how thoroughly I could dismantle the life he took for granted. What he wouldn't know, what would keep him awake at night in the weeks to come, was that this was just the beginning. I had set in motion events that even I couldn't fully predict, creating ripples that would eventually become a tidal wave. As I pulled away from the curb, a notification appeared on my phone. An email confirmation. Subject line: Your appointment with Dr. Eleanor Richards has been confirmed. The first step in a plan that even Mr. Weber didn't know about. A plan that would either save me or destroy me completely. A plan that had begun to form the moment I stood alone in the rain, saying goodbye to my children while their father lay on a beach with another woman. I drove away without looking back, leaving behind the woman I had been, the woman who would have forgiven, who would have tried to understand, who would have shouldered the blame to keep her marriage intact. That woman was gone, buried alongside her sons. In her place was someone new, someone I was just beginning to know, someone who would never again mistake blind devotion for love or sacrifice for strength. And David? He had no idea what was waiting for him. David's key turned in the lock at exactly 8:43 p.m. I knew because I'd been sitting in the darkened living room for over an hour, waiting. Not at the airport as he'd expected, but here, in what had once been our sanctuary. I heard him drop his luggage in the hallway. "Melissa?" His voice carried that familiar note of expectation, of someone accustomed to being answered. I remained silent, my fingers tracing the edges of the folder in my lap. "Melissa? Are you home?" Confusion now, tinged with annoyance. The sound of his footsteps moved from the entryway toward the kitchen, then back to the living room. I reached over and switched on the lamp beside me. The sudden pool of light made him start. "Jesus, Melissa, why are you sitting in the dark?" His tan face was flushed from the surprise, his hair artfully tousled in that way that used to make my heart skip. Now I just wondered if Carolina had run her fingers through it. "How was Thailand?" I asked, my voice eerily calm. His face froze, then reconfigured into a practiced expression of confusion. "What are you talking about?" "I was in Brasilia for a client meeting." "Strange. Your assistant seemed to think you had cleared your calendar to be with me. For the funeral. Remember that? Our son's funeral?" Each word was precisely enunciated, each syllable a small blade. David's face paled beneath his tan. "Melissa, I can explain." "Don't bother." I opened the folder and removed a photograph. David and Carolina on a beach, her head thrown back in laughter, his arm around her waist. I particularly like this one. You look so unburdened. He took a step toward me. Where did you get that? Carolina has a public Instagram, David. She was careful not to tag you, but she wasn't careful enough with her captions. Paradise found with my love. Posted the day we buried our children. He raked a hand through his hair, his expression cycling rapidly through shock, anger, and calculation. I could almost see him running through potential lies, excuses, deflections. It's not what you think, he finally said, settling on that most cliché of defenses. I laughed, a sound sharp enough to cut. It's exactly what I think. While I was putting our babies in the ground, you were putting yourself into another woman. David flinched. That's crude, Melissa. Is it? Cruder than a father missing his children's funeral for a tropical tryst? Cruder than a husband leaving his grieving wife alone with a text message excuse? He sank onto the couch opposite me, his posture deflating. I couldn't face it, he whispered. The funeral, the grief, any of it. I just needed to escape. And Carolina was your escape hatch? How convenient. How long, David? How long has she been your paradise? His silence was answer enough. Since before the twins? I pressed, needing to know just how deep the betrayal ran. He nodded almost imperceptibly. It started as just business meetings, then late dinners, then you were fucking her while I was decorating the nursery, while I was on bed rest trying to keep our sons safe, while I was planning their funeral. Each sentence landed like a slap. I watched him wince with a detached fascination. I never meant for any of this to happen, he said, as if that excused everything. Few people do, I replied. But choices were made, David. By you. And now by me. His head snapped up. What does that mean? I handed him the folder. See for yourself. As he flipped through the pages, his expression morphed from confusion to disbelief to horror. Bank statements showing empty accounts. Credit card statements with maxed balances. Legal documents with my signature on dotted lines. What have you done? His voice was barely audible. What I should have done years ago. I've taken control of my life. He jumped to his feet. You've ruined me. These donations, they're irreversible. And the accounts. Our joint accounts, I finished for him. My name is on every one of them, just as yours is. I had every legal right to do what I did. This is insane, Melissa. This isn't you. You're right. The old Melissa would have cried, begged you to explain, pleaded for another chance. She would have blamed herself for not being enough. But that Melissa died with her sons. David's face flushed dark with anger. I'll fight this. I'll tell everyone you're unstable with grief. No judge will side with you. I felt a smile spread across my face, cool and knowing. Perhaps. But before you rush to your lawyer, you might want to check your email. I've sent copies of everything, including all the evidence of your affair, to the partners at your firm. The ones with the morality clause in your contract, the ones who just made you partner based on your family man image. He staggered as if physically struck. You wouldn't. I already have. And there's more, David. So much more. For the first time since I'd known him, David looked afraid. He sank back onto the couch, head in his hands. What do you want, Melissa? Money? The house? What will make this go away? I stood, smoothing down the simple black dress I'd chosen for this confrontation. I don't want anything from you. Not anymore. I've already taken what I need to start over. As I moved toward the door, he called after me. Where are you going? This is your home too. I paused, hand on the doorknob. No, David. This was never my home. It was just a beautiful cage I helped build around myself. So that's it? After 7 years, you're just walking away? I turned to face him one last time. That's rich. Coming from the man who walked away from his own children's funeral. His face crumpled. For a moment, I glimpsed genuine remorse beneath the self-pity. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Goodbye, David. Outside, the night air felt clean and new against my skin. I walked to my car with steady steps, climbed in, and drove away from the house that had contained both my greatest joys and deepest sorrows. My phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Richards. Reviewed your files. We need to discuss options immediately. Can you come in tomorrow? I typed back a quick affirmative, then set the phone aside. Whatever the doctor had found, I would face it tomorrow. Tonight belonged to the small, fierce victory of standing up for myself at last. As I drove through the quiet streets toward my mother's house, I realized I hadn't told David everything. I hadn't told him about the mysterious symptoms that had sent me to Dr. Richards in the first place, symptoms that had begun during my pregnancy, but that I'd attributed to the strain of carrying twins. I hadn't told him about the preliminary tests, or the specialist referrals, or the growing fear that had been my silent companion, even as I grieved our sons. Most importantly, I hadn't told him about the document at the very bottom of that folder, the one he wouldn't discover until he'd worked through his rage at the financial ruin I'd orchestrated. The document that would change everything. Again, just when he thought he understood the full scope of what I'd done. The document that held the real reason I needed to break free now, while I still had the strength to do it. My headlights cut through the darkness as I made a turn toward my mother's neighborhood. Behind me, the life I'd built with David receded into shadows. Ahead, uncertainty waited. Frightening, but somehow less terrifying than the cage of lies I'd just escaped. I took a deep breath and pressed down on the accelerator, speeding toward whatever came next. For the first time in years, I was driving my own life. Dr. Eleanor Richards was exactly as I remembered from my initial consultation. Tall, silver-haired, with eyes that radiated both clinical precision and genuine compassion. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "The test results are conclusive, Melissa," she said, sliding a folder across her desk. "You have stage 2B cervical cancer." The words hung in the air between us, solid and immovable. Cancer. The disease that had taken my grandmother when I was 12. The monster that had lurked in the shadows of my childhood nightmares. "I suspected something might be wrong during your pregnancy," she continued, "but your symptoms were consistent with carrying twins. After their birth, when the symptoms persisted, that's when we should have caught it. But with their illness, and then their passing..." She trailed off, allowing me to fill in the blanks. With the chaos and heartbreak of the past few months, I'd ignored my own health. Pain had become such a constant companion, both physical and emotional, that I couldn't distinguish one from the other anymore. "What's the prognosis?" My voice sounded far away, as if someone else was asking the question. Dr. Richards leaned forward. "It's serious, but not hopeless. The cancer hasn't metastasized to other organs. With aggressive treatment, surgery, followed by radiation and possibly chemotherapy, your 5-year survival rate is around 65 to 70%. 65 to 70%. Numbers that would determine whether I lived or died, whether I had a future or not. "When do we start?" I asked. "I've already scheduled you for surgery next week." "But Melissa," she paused, her eyes intent on mine. "You need support for this. You mentioned you're staying with your mother, but is there anyone else? Your husband?" The question brought a bitter laugh to my lips. "David is no longer in the picture." She nodded, not pressing for details. "Then you'll need to build a support system. Cancer treatment isn't something you can do alone." I thought of my mother, already worn thin by grief for her grandsons. I thought of friends I'd neglected as I'd folded myself smaller and smaller to fit into David's world. I thought of colleagues I'd lost touch with when I stepped back from my career. "I don't have many people left," I admitted. Dr. Richards's expression softened. "Then perhaps it's time to find new ones. I'll connect you with our support group for women with gynecological cancers. Many of them have gone through similar life disruptions, divorce, loss, career changes. You'd be surprised how powerful those connections can be." I nodded numbly, accepting the stack of pamphlets she offered. Outside her office, sitting in my car, I let the tears come. Not just for the diagnosis, but for everything. The sons I'd lost. The husband who'd betrayed me. The life that had crumbled beneath my feet. When the tears finally subsided, I started the car and made a decision. I wouldn't tell my mother about the cancer, not yet. She'd already endured too much. First, I would get through the surgery. Then, when I knew more about what I was facing, I would find the right words to tell her. The week before surgery passed in a blur of preparations. I found a small apartment to rent, using some of the money I'd taken from the joint accounts. I met with Mr. Weber again, finalizing the divorce proceedings I'd initiated. I attended my first support group meeting, sitting silently in the back, listening to women share stories of resilience that seemed impossible to match. Through it all, David called and texted incessantly, sometimes pleading, sometimes threatening, sometimes declaring love that he'd never properly demonstrated. I didn't respond to any of it. The folder I'd left for him had done its work. His partners had placed him on administrative leave pending an investigation into his moral conduct. Carolina had apparently returned to Brazil alone, and the financial damage I'd inflicted was substantial enough to keep him scrambling. The night before my surgery, as I sat alone in my sparsely furnished apartment, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Melissa Mitchell?" a woman's voice asked when I answered. "Yes, who's this?" There was a brief hesitation. "This is Carolina Hamilton." My blood turned to ice. "How did you get this number?" "David has been calling me nonstop since he returned from Thailand," she said, her accented English precise and controlled. "He's not well. He told me what you did." I gripped the phone tighter. "Did he also tell you why?" "Yes." The single word carried unexpected weight. "I knew he was married, but he told me you were separated. When I found out about your children, I ended things immediately. That's why I left Thailand early." "How noble of you," I said bitterly. "I'm not calling to defend myself," Carolina replied. "I'm calling because David mentioned you've been seeing doctors. He found some medical paperwork you left behind." My stomach dropped. The preliminary test results I thought I'd packed. Of course David would have gone through everything in the house, looking for any advantage in the war I'd started. That's none of his business anymore. Or yours. "Maybe not," she agreed. "But if you're ill, he should know. Despite everything, he cares about you." A harsh laugh escaped me. Is that what he tells himself? That leaving me alone at our children's funeral was an act of care? There was a long silence before Carolina spoke again. "I'm sorry for my part in your pain, Melissa. Truly. Whatever you're facing, I hope you're not facing it alone." The call ended, leaving me strangely shaken. I hadn't expected compassion from the other woman. I hadn't expected anything from her at all. The next morning, as I was checking into the hospital for my surgery, a familiar figure appeared beside my wheelchair. My mother, her face drawn with concern and barely controlled anger. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded. I reached for her hand. "I was going to after the surgery. I didn't want you to worry." "Worry? Melissa, you're my daughter. It's my job to worry." She knelt beside the wheelchair. "How did you think you were going to do this alone?" "I don't know," I admitted. I've been so focused on cutting ties with the past that I didn't think clearly about the future." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "Well, I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." As they wheeled me toward the surgical suite, a text message lit up my phone. From David. "I know about the cancer. I'm at the hospital. Please let me see you." I showed the message to my mother. "Did you tell him?" She shook her head. "No, but I'm not surprised he found out. It's a small community, and David has connections everywhere." She hesitated. "Do you want to see him?" Did I? The man who had abandoned me at my lowest point, who had betrayed me repeatedly, who had built a life with me on a foundation of lies, the father of my lost children. "No," I said finally. "Whatever David and I had is over. I need to focus on surviving now." My mother nodded, squeezing my hand as the orderlies pushed my wheelchair through swinging doors emblazoned with "Authorized personnel only." The last thing I saw before the anesthesia took hold was the surgical team, masked and ready, their eyes holding promises they couldn't guarantee they'd keep. When I woke hours later, groggy and in pain, the room was dim except for a small lamp. A figure sat in the chair beside my bed. Not my mother, but David, his face haggard with what looked like genuine concern. "You shouldn't be here," I whispered, my throat raw from the intubation tube. "I had to see for myself that you were okay," he said, leaning forward. "Your mother finally took pity on me. She's getting coffee." I turned my face away. "I don't want you here. Melissa, please. I know what I did was unforgivable, but this, cancer, it changes things." I looked back at him, anger cutting through the fog of pain medication. "Does it? Does it bring our sons back? Does it erase your affair?" Does it make you the man I thought you were? His eyes filled with tears. No, nothing can do that. But it doesn't have to be this way between us. Let me help you through this. We can start again. Differently. For a moment, I almost believed him. The David sitting before me looked like the man I'd fallen in love with. Earnest, vulnerable, sincere. But then I remembered standing alone in the rain at a funeral he should have attended. I remembered the photographs of him with Carolina, smiling while I drowned in grief. There is no us anymore, David. There's just me, fighting for my life. And you, facing the consequences of your choices. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. What about the document? He asked quietly. The one at the bottom of the folder? Why didn't you tell me? Before I could answer, the door opened and my mother returned, followed by Dr. Richards. Seeing David, the doctor frowned. Mr. Mitchell, I believe I was clear that only immediate family members are permitted at this time. I'm her husband, David protested. Soon-to-be ex-husband, I corrected, my voice strengthening despite the pain. Dr. Richards looked between us, then made a swift decision. Mr. Mitchell, I need to examine my patient now. Please wait outside. After David reluctantly left, Dr. Richards checked my vital signs, then sat on the edge of the bed. The surgery went well. We removed all visible cancer and the surrounding lymph nodes. Pathology is still pending, but I'm cautiously optimistic. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by trepidation. And the other matter we discussed? The doctor's expression turned grave. That's more complicated. The cancer treatment could compromise your chances significantly. If you want to pursue it, we'd need to act quickly before radiation begins. My mother looked confused. What other matter? Melissa, what aren't you telling me? I took a deep breath, wincing at the pain that shot through my abdomen. Mom, there's something I need to tell you. Something David discovered in the documents I left behind. Something that might change everything. Again. The doctor discreetly stepped out, leaving me alone with my mother and the secret I'd been keeping since the day I discovered David's betrayal. A secret that wasn't just about the past, but about the possibility of a future I'd never dared to imagine until now. I'm pregnant, I said, the words hanging in the sterile hospital air. My mother's face cycled through confusion, shock, and finally, cautious joy. But how? When? Right before David left for Thailand. The irony is, I didn't know myself until after the funeral, when I took the test thinking my symptoms were just grief manifesting physically. I adjusted myself on the hospital bed, wincing. By then, I'd already discovered his affair. Does he know? I nodded. He found the paperwork in the house after I left. It was the last document in the folder, a confirmation of pregnancy from my doctor dated 2 days after the funeral. My mother sat heavily in the chair David had vacated. And the cancer? What does that mean for the baby? Dr. Richards had been clear about the risks. Surgery during pregnancy was challenging but possible. Radiation and chemotherapy, which might still be necessary depending on the pathology results, could harm the developing fetus. It means I have choices to make, I replied simply. Difficult ones. My mother took my hand. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. Over the next few days, as I recovered from surgery, David continued his campaign to re-enter my life. Flowers appeared daily. Texts alternated between declarations of love and promises of support for the baby. He even sent a letter formally relinquishing any claim to the money I'd taken, assuring me he only wanted to make amends. On the third day, Dr. Richards brought the pathology results. The margins are clear, she said, relief evident in her voice. And the lymph nodes show no evidence of metastasis. Given these results, I believe we can safely delay radiation until after you deliver, with careful monitoring. The news felt like the first ray of sunlight after an endless storm. The pregnancy could continue. My chances of recovery were good. For the first time in months, hope seemed like a reasonable emotion rather than a cruel mirage. That afternoon, I agreed to see David. He entered my hospital room cautiously, as if afraid I might evict him at any moment. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, remaining standing at the foot of my bed. "How are you feeling?" "Better. The cancer hasn't spread. They think I can delay further treatment until after the baby is born." Relief washed over his face. That's wonderful news. About both you and the baby. I studied him. The man I'd loved. The father of my lost sons. The betrayer who'd broken my heart. He looked diminished somehow. Not just physically, but essentially. The confident, sometimes arrogant man I'd married had been replaced by someone older. More uncertain. David. Why are you here? Really? He met my gaze directly. Because I want to make things right. Because despite everything I've done, I still love you. Because that's our child you're carrying. Love, I repeated, tasting the word. You keep using that word, but I don't think it means what you think it means. A ghost of a smile touched his lips at the movie reference. One of our favorites from earlier, happier days. Fair enough, but I know this much. When I heard about the cancer, about the baby, something shifted. I realized what I've thrown away. What exactly do you think you've thrown away? I asked. A wife who put her career on hold for yours? A mother who endured the loss of her children alone because you were too busy with your mistress? Or just your comfortable life with a woman who never questioned your lies? He flinched. All of it. I've been seeing a therapist since I got back from Thailand. I'm trying to understand why I did what I did. And what profound insight have you gained? David sank into the chair beside my bed. That I'm a coward. That when the twins got sick, I couldn't face the possibility of losing them. That instead of supporting you, I ran to Carolina because she represented an escape from pain. He paused. I know it's no excuse. No, it's not, I agreed. But at least it's honest. We sat in silence for a long moment, the beeping of monitors the only sound. What do you want, David? I finally asked. A reconciliation? Joint custody? What? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I want whatever you're willing to give me. A chance to prove I can be better. A role in our child's life. Forgiveness eventually, though I know I haven't earned it. I closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted. I don't know if I can give you any of those things. Right now, I need to focus on getting well and keeping this baby safe. Everything else is secondary. I understand, he said, rising to leave. At the door, he paused. For what it's worth, Melissa, I'm proud of what you did. Taking control, standing up for yourself, even though it cost me everything. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. After he left, I placed a protective hand over my still flat abdomen. A new life, against all odds. A possibility I hadn't dared contemplate after losing the twins. Now this pregnancy represented not just hope for motherhood again, but a reason to fight the cancer with every ounce of my strength. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm to my life. Regular checkups with both my oncologist and my obstetrician. Support group meetings where I finally began to share my story. Quiet evenings with my mother. Rebuilding the bond that had frayed during my years with David. And, surprisingly, careful, tentative conversations with David himself. Not about reconciliation. That door remained firmly closed. But about co-parenting. About the kind of father he wanted to be. About the mistakes he was determined not to repeat. 3 months after my surgery, with the pregnancy progressing well and no signs of the cancer returning, I moved into a small house with a garden, purchased with the money from the divorce settlement. David had been generous, far more than the law required, transferring assets and property without contest. It was while planting a row of sunflowers in my new garden that I received a text from Carolina. We had exchanged a few messages over the months. Brief, cautious communications that had gradually evolved from awkward apologies to something approaching mutual respect. I'm returning to London for work next week, her message read. If you're willing, I'd like to meet in person. I sat back on my heels, soil clinging to my gardening gloves. Why would I agree to meet the woman who had been my husband's mistress? What could possibly come from such an encounter except renewed pain? Yet something in me, the same something that had given me the courage to confront David, to face cancer, to begin a new life alone, was curious. I typed back, coffee at Harbor Cafe, Tuesday at 2 p.m. Carolina was already there when I arrived, elegant in a simple blue dress that set off her caramel skin. She rose as I approached, her eyes widening slightly at my visible pregnancy before offering a tentative smile. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as we sat across from each other at the small table. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I admitted. We ordered herbal tea for me, espresso for her, and then sat in awkward silence until our drinks arrived. "I wanted to see you face to face," Carolina finally said, "to tell you how deeply sorry I am. Not just for the affair, but for not ending it when I learned about your children. I have no excuse." I stirred my tea slowly. "Why did you stay with him, knowing what you knew?" She looked down at her cup. "Because I believed I was in love. Because I thought he would leave you for me. Because I convinced myself that his grief justified his lies." She shook her head. "I was wrong on all counts." "Do you still love him?" The question surprised even me. Carolina's laugh held no humor. "No. What I felt wasn't love. It was infatuation mixed with ambition. David could open doors for my career, and he was attentive in ways no one had been before." I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to. Early in our relationship, David's focused attention had made me feel special, chosen, adored. Only later did I recognize it as a tool he wielded to get what he wanted. "He's changed, you know," Carolina continued, "since everything happened. Since finding out about the baby and your illness. People don't change that easily," I countered. "No, they don't," she agreed. "But sometimes, losing everything makes change possible." She hesitated. "Are you considering taking him back?" The question hung between us. Two women connected by the same man, by pain he'd caused, by futures he'd altered. "No," I said finally. "What David and I had is over, but we're finding a way forward as co-parents. It's complicated." Carolina nodded. "Life usually is." She reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. "I'm starting a foundation for bereaved parents. It's something I've been working on since Thailand. If you're ever interested in getting involved, I'd welcome your perspective." I took the card, surprised by the gesture. "Why are you doing this?" She met my gaze squarely. "Because I need to make amends in a way that matters. And because no one should have to face that kind of loss alone, as you did." After we parted ways, I walked along the harbor, the afternoon sun warm on my skin. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Doctor's appointment still on for Friday? I'd like to be there if that's okay." I typed back a simple yes, then continued my walk, thinking about choices and consequences. About forgiveness not as an eraser of the past, but as a possible gateway to a different future. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, I gave birth to a daughter. Small but healthy, with a cry that filled the delivery room and eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of the universe. I named her Hope, not just for what she represented in my life, but for what I wanted her to carry into the world. David was there, keeping a respectful distance but present in a way he hadn't been when the twins were born. My mother was there too, her face wet with tears of joy as she held her granddaughter for the first time. In the quiet hours after the birth, when Hope was sleeping in her hospital bassinet and my mother had gone home to rest, David sat beside my bed. "She's perfect," he said softly, "just like her brothers were." The mention of our sons brought the familiar ache, but it was different now. A bittersweet reminder rather than a crushing weight. "Yes, she is," I agreed. "I want you to know," David said carefully, "that I understand my place in your life now. I'm Hope's father, and I'll be the best one I can be. But us, what we had, I know that's gone. I've accepted that." I studied his face, searching for the manipulation or hidden agenda that had become his hallmark in the final years of our marriage, but all I saw was sincerity, and perhaps a kind of peace that hadn't been there before. "Thank you," I said simply, "for understanding." After he left, I eased myself out of bed and stood by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. In my arms, Hope stirred, her tiny hand finding my finger and holding on with surprising strength. 2 weeks after Hope's birth, my post-cancer scans came back clear. 6 weeks later, I enrolled in a master's program in childhood grief counseling. And 3 months after that, I spoke at my first bereavement support group, sharing the story of my twins, my cancer, my divorce, and my rebirth. Life wasn't perfect, There were days when grief ambushed me, when memories of standing alone at a funeral threatened to pull me under. There were uncomfortable co-parenting moments with David, tense conversations about boundaries and expectations. There were late nights of doubt and fear about the cancer returning, about raising Hope alone, about all the uncertainties that still lay ahead. But there was also joy, in Hope's first smile, in the sunflowers that bloomed in my garden, in the friendships that formed through my support group, in the growing confidence that came with each day I navigated on my own terms. 1 year to the day after I'd discovered David's betrayal, I stood in my garden, watching Hope play on a blanket beneath the shade of a maple tree. My phone rang. Dr. Richards with my latest scan results. All clear. Another milestone of survival. As I ended the call, I noticed a text message waiting. From Carolina, with a photo of a newly opened bereavement center named after my twins. Thought you'd want to see this. The James and Julian Mitchell Center is officially open. Your story inspired it all. Tears blurred my vision as I typed back a thank you. From the worst moment of my life, standing alone at my children's funeral, had emerged not just personal strength, but a ripple of change that might help others facing similar pain. Hope gurgled from her blanket, reaching for a butterfly that had landed nearby. I sat beside her, marveling at her perfect fingers, her curious eyes, her complete trust in the world despite all that had happened before she entered it. "We made it, little one," I whispered, "and we're going to be okay." The butterfly took flight, rising on a gentle breeze. Hope watched it go, her face alight with wonder. And I watched her, this miracle child who had arrived in the aftermath of betrayal and loss, who had given me a reason to fight when cancer threatened to take everything, who reminded me daily that endings could also be beginnings. David would be picking her up later for his weekend visit. Our new normal, a carefully choreographed dance of shared parenting without shared lives. He was trying, genuinely trying, to be the father Hope deserved. Whether he would succeed was still an open question, but his effort was undeniable. As for me, I was no longer defined by what I had lost or by what had been done to me. I was defined by what I had built from the ruins. A new home, a new purpose, a new understanding of my own strength. The woman who had stood alone in the rain a year ago, broken by grief and betrayal, wouldn't recognize the woman I had become. Mother, survivor, advocate, whole unto myself. That woman had believed her life was over. She couldn't have imagined that it was only just beginning.